Language of Government and the Power of Plain English to Sean Cunningham, the 19th of April 2017. Communications, the Monarchy, the National Archives. When governments communicate, the medium can be as valuable as the message. In the modern age of instant news and response through social media, it is often easy to lose sight of the importance of the method of interaction as well as the specific information being transmitted. Language has always been key to effective communication. In 2014, the Government Digital Service announced clear guidelines for writing in plain English on government web pages. Accessible language in official information remains one of the main factors in encouraging the participation of citizens in the democratic process. A focus on language and the methods by which the population hears about policy or receives important information is not a new concern of the Crown. Some previous landmarks in the official use of English required statutes. The 1362 Pleading in English Act permitted courtroom business to be done in English. The Anglo-Norman French normally used by judges and attorneys was not easily understood and left lay people confused about what happened in court. The written records of common law cases remained in Latin until the Proceedings in Court of Justice Act of 1730 required that English become both the language of pleadings and of the written record of cases in the law courts of the untied Kingdom of Great Britain. English documents created by the Crown. Documents written in English are found in the Crown's archive during the medieval period, but they are rare before the growing standardization of written English by the Crown's Secretariat, the Chancery, during Henry V's reign, 1413–22, Occasionally before that time, voices in English can be heard in records sent to the Crown, such as vernacular petitions or legal records that captured direct speech. More difficult to locate are English documents created by the Crown itself. Where examples do occur, we can be sure that their creation was significant. One of the earliest deliberate post-conquest uses of English by government dates from October 1258. It relates to the enforcement of the agreements known as the Provisions of Oxford, between King Henry III and the Lords. 2. Henry III from his tomb in Westminster Abbey, public domain. Previous constitutional crises of Henry III's reign had been managed by negotiation between the king and his ruling elites, often resulting in a reissue of the Magna Carta of 1225. By the start of the 1250s, however, Henry was running out of chances to deliver previous commitments to uphold the clauses of the Great Charter. Henry III was mindful that his father, King John, had triggered a civil war in 1215 by rejecting earlier agreements. Crises during Henry III's reign. As a series of crises overstretched the capacities of Henry's regime, he was in danger of repeating his father's underestimation of the importance that the nation placed upon the rights and liberties recorded in the clauses of the Charter. Foreign war and an attempt to build support for a crusade left the king heavily in debt. Pressure to generate funds began to be felt throughout the country. Henry was also failing to keep the church happy as the privileges of clerics were squeezed to fill the Crown's coffers. The 1255 uprising of Prince Llewellyn ap Griffith in Wales and confusion in England's wider foreign policy drove the aristocratic lords into conflicting factions. A sudden combination of war, harvest failure and the disintegration of King Henry's relations with the church over papal taxes brought the crises to a head. In the spring of 1258, Henry summoned the lords and senior churchmen to Parliament. To avoid pushing political opposition into armed rebellion, King Henry had to agree to be bound to the type of collaboration in government and guarantees over rights that were found in Magna Carta. Depiction of the king's forces fighting the barons in the Second Barons' War, 1264–7. British Library Royal 16 vi. Fol. 427 v. Public domain. A group of nobles led by Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, forced the king to accept the advice of a council of 15 barons. This council was to be elected from two groups of 12 men nominated by the barons and by the king. The Council of 15 would also elect the main offices of state and all would be accountable to Parliament, which would meet 3 times each year. The provisions also required that the conduct of local offices be investigated and monitored. Since so much of the Crown's business passed through the sheriffs, much attention fell on how their role would be reformed. Reaching all the king's subjects to publicize this agreement, in 1258, the Crown issued for the first time official letters with the same text in Latin, French and English. This was a crucial moment in the government's use of the English language to communicate in a way that could reach all citizens directly. The letters were addressed to all the king's subjects and not to named officials in the counties. Sheriffs or other officers would normally have received instructions in Latin writs or letters, often including a formal text that was to be the basis for proclamations. Staff in the sheriff's office would translate, summarize or rework that text into a vernacular form that could be proclaimed by criers at the sheriff's court or other public gatherings such as markets. That process created an opportunity for the text to be presented in regional dialects that would connect directly with local communities. A system that allowed local officials discretion over how the Crown's instructions were transmitted within their own districts was flexible, but remained open to manipulation, especially when the conduct of sheriffs was an issue. The letters of the 18th of October 1258 were produced in English precisely because they concerned how the sheriffs behaved in representing the Crown and in upholding the reforms that had been imposed upon the king. Those documents were to be stored in the sheriff's treasuries of each county as a permanent point of reference. The letters required that an identical text was published or proclaimed as it was written. Does this moment represent the traceable origin of civil service English? This document captures the tone of the type of English spoken in London in the mid-13th century. The clerk who drafted and wrote these letters was Robert of Fulham. He was an experienced exchequer official, who also worked in the exchequer of the Jews. His linguistic skills might therefore have stretched from Latin and French to Hebrew and English. He was rewarded with the huge sum of 50 shillings for the preparation in English and French of the letters issued by the Lords of the Council to be issued in support of the provisions of Oxford. Making the language accessible, linguistic historians have noted the language used in this letter is conservative, even old-fashioned. 3. Where anglicized versions of French words might be expected in the text, a form of English is used that reflects a pre-conquest Older English style. Near the start of the letter, Thorough God's Fultum, meaning by God's grace or help, is written instead of something based on the French par la grâce de Dieu. The literate and illiterate subjects whom the letters were meant for, the Eliad and Eliweed, literally, the learned and unlearned or lewd, are addressed in a form related to Older English rather than the French clerics and lays. In these letters, the king's natural advisers are his readsmen and not the older French language equivalent of conseillers. Many of the witnesses are titled as eols and not French comtes. These changes suggest a deliberate attempt by the administrators at the center of government to link the language of the letters directly to the speech of the majority of the population. Would knowing that this proclamation was written and delivered as the Crown intended have made the king's subjects more willing to pay attention to the message it contained. One of the major consequences of the Norman conquest of 1066 had been a conscious cultural eclipse of Anglo-Saxon Old English as the language of formal government charters and other documents. No one would have remembered that fact in 1258. The distribution of letters in English would, however, have made a difference to the reception of specific news about the king and lords collaborating in government. The medium helped to set the tone and intention of the agreement in terms that related directly to the type of rule that people experienced on a daily basis. Although the provisions were soon undone, with the lords themselves reverting to Latin in the documents to emphasize the legality of their position, the principle of plain English communication direct to the population had been established. Letter in English to all the king's subjects, the 18th of October 1258, the National Archives, C6673, M.15. C6673, M.15 Transcription Henry, Thorough God's Fultum King on Engelmeloand, Loaward on Erloand, Duke and Norm, Andy, on Aquitaine, and Ewell on Anjou, Sender Gretting to Ale Highs Holday, Eliad and Eliweed, on Huntendonesha. That Witten the Well Al That We Willen and Unnan That, that ur radesman al, other the moare dale of Haem, that beoth Icos and Thurras and Thurra that Lowens folk on Uraconerish, habeth Idon and Shullen Don in the worthness of Goad and on Ur Triouth, for the freem of the Lowen Thurra the besite of than to foreignized readsman, beos to defist Andelestind in al thin Jabutana end. And we hoten al Ur Trio in the Triouth that Heo versus othen, that Heos to defistlish Helden and Swerian to Helden and to Werian though Isetnesses that Bian a maked and Bian to Macian, thorough than to foreign eyesight readsman, other thorough the moare dale of Haem, elswo alshit is by foreign eyesight, and that ehc other help that for to done by the nilch oath agents al men right for to done and tofoangen. And known ne nime of low and ne of Etchworthera this beside muffer bian a lay other ivers don oni wise. And gif oni other oni cuman her wongenes, we willen and hoten that ale your trio Haem Helden deadly chiffon. And for that we willen that this beos to defist and lestend, we send and gue this writ open, I signed with your seal, to holden a manges gue in a hoard. Witness versus Selwyn eat London Thane Etch 10th day on the month of October, in the 2 and Fouertite gear of your crooning. And this wise I don eat for an your Isorn readsman, Boneface Archbishop on Canterbury, Walter of Canterlow, Bishop on Wirechester, Simon of Montfort, Earl on Leicester, Richard of Clare, Earl on Gloucester and on Hertford, Roger Bigod, Earl on Norfolk and Mariscal on Englemelound, Perrys of Sorwaye, Wilhelm of Fort, Earl on Albemarle, Lohan of Plessis, Earl on Werwick, Lohan Jeffreys Soon, Perrys of Montfort, Richard of Grey, Roger of Mortimer, Imes of Alderthal, Andit for an Othray Inaha. And Alon though Ilch Warden is I send into Erichi Othray Shkar our Althera Conerish on Englemeloand, and Ek in Telephone Ireland. 4. Translation Henry by God's grace, King of England, Lord of Ireland, Duke of Normandy and of Aquitaine and Earl of Anjou, sends greeting to all his subjects, learned and lewd, in Huntingdonshire. You all know well that we want and desire that our councillors, the greater part of whom have been chosen by us and by the people in Orkingdom, have acted and should act according to the honour of God and loyalty to us, and for the good of the realm, according to the provisions of those aforesaid councillors, that they be steadfast and firm in all things forever. And we command and admonish all faithful and loyal men by the fealty that they owe us, firmly to hold and to swear to observe and maintain those statutes which have been made or shall in future be made by the council or by the majority thereof in the manner stated. And that all men aid each other in doing this by the same oath against all men who either give or receive a bribe. And that none shall take land or goods to any way which would infringe or impair this provision in any way. And if any should oppose this decree, we will and command our faithful subjects to treat them as our mortal enemies. And since we wish this act to be firm and enduring, we are sending our letters patent sealed with our seal, to every county to remain there in its archives. Witness ourselves at London the 18th day of October in the 42nd year of our reign. And this act was done in the presence of our councillors Boniface, Archbishop of Canterbury, Walter de Cantilupe, Bishop of Worcester, Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, Richard de Clare, Earl of Gloucester and Hertford, Roger Bigod, Earl of Norfolk and Marshal of England, Humphrey de Bohun, Earl of Hereford, Peter of Savoy, William de Forts, Earl of Albemarle, John de Plessis, Earl of Warwick, Roger de Quincy, Earl of Winchester, John Fitzgeoffrey, Peter de Montfort, Richard de Grey, Roger de Mortimer, James de Audley, Hugh de Spencer and others after them. And similar letters are to be sent to every other shire within the kingdom of Fengland and likewise into Ireland. 1. M. Richardson, Henry V, The English Chancery and Chancery English, Speculum, 55, No. 4, October 1980, 726-50. 2. The significance of this document has been thoroughly analyzed in M. T. Clanchy, From Memory to Written Record, England 1066-1307, 2 and DN, Oxford, Blackwell, 1993, pp. 220-2. This blog post offers no new insights, but does put themes in a broader context. 3. David Burnley, The History of the English Language, A Sourcebook, pp. 116-17. Hans Frede Nielsen, From Dialect to Standard English, 1154-1776, Volume 2. pp. 123-7. Seth Lehrer, Inventing English, A Portable History of the Language, page p. 54-8. 4. This is the Middle English version of the French text found in Calendar of Patent Rolls, 1247-58, p. 655-6, c. 66-70, m. 1. This also exists in a different translation in a F. Treharne and Sanders, Documents of the Baronial Movement of Reform and Rebellion, 1258-1267, Oxford, OUP, 1973, pp. 118-22. Keep tabs on the past. Sign up for our email alerts. Tags. Henry III. AllGov. Uckblogs AllGov. Uckblog posts Governor Akal Department's Accessibility Statement cookies. All content is available under the Open Government License IF 3.0, except where otherwise stated. Copyright Crown Copyright